Ryan, walk us through the details of this National Guard deployment and tell us, what are you seeing there this morning?
So far, it's relatively quiet here this morning, Anna. These National Guard troops that have been mobilized to help in this effort that President Trump unveiled yesterday are just getting their orders. So we do see them trickling into the armory here behind me. When they're all fully staffed, we expect somewhere in the range of 800 troops that will be deployed throughout Washington, D.C. Their role will really be in a support effort behind the various law enforcement agencies that have also been mobilized. Of course, the Metropolitan Police Department, D.C.'s kind of frontline law enforcement agency, is now technically under the control of the administration. So they will be the first responders, if you will, but then they'll get support from the FBI, from the ATF, from the Department of Homeland Security, from the Park Police, and then on. And then the National Guard will be there just in case to help. In many ways, it is a symbolic demonstration to show that there are boots on the ground ready to tackle what President Trump believes is a serious problem. Of course, there is a wide range of opinion as to just how serious that problem is and whether it requires this military presence. Regardless, this is something that is already underway. The question is, how long will we see these National Guard troops on the ground here in Washington, D.C.? If they are to stay past 30 days, it will require congressional approval. We're already seeing some pushback from Democrats. They would need to at least get on board in some form or fashion if it goes beyond that 30-day window. So, of course, Anna, this is just the beginning of what the president hopes can begin to curb this problem here in Washington, D.C.
So, Monica, though, what exactly are the White House goals? What benchmarks will they use to decide whether they've accomplished their objective and can pull back?
That's the main question here, Anna, and it's a bit unclear. I mean, the Attorney General Pam Bondi came out and declared at that press conference yesterday that crime in D.C. as we know it is effectively ending because of this operation. So that was her declaration, that maybe the goal here is really to end crime, again, as we know it, which seems to be a very high bar, and one now that the White House and the Trump administration owns, because they are trying to put all this effort into a crime crackdown. And of course, we know President Trump has been hinting at this for months, so it shouldn't come as a surprise that he took this step. But the timing did come as a little bit of a shock to some of the local officials who weren't briefed on the plans. And it came, we're told by White House officials, because the president was really disturbed by this attack on a former DOJ employee who was a part of an attempted carjacking gone wrong, according to a police report, and he was attacked in that. And then that really accelerated this process, this plan that already some elements of which were in motion, but they decided to execute it faster, get those federal agents out over the last couple of days, and then, of course, call in the National Guard. But the timing here is what's also critical for measuring what the White House could call success here, Anna, because as Ryan just noted, the president may only have 30 days to do this. So at the end of that, we don't know whether they will be able to, quote, declare victory on that if they are not able to put crime where they want it to be. There's also a huge question here, Anna, about the unhoused population and where they're going to go. The White House claims they have places for people to go outside of the district, but they haven't provided any specifics on that key part of this operation either.
Okay, so Rob, when you hear the National Guard mission, which we're told is to protect federal assets, provide a safe environment for law enforcement, very similar to what they were tasked with in L.A., troops protecting cops seems redundant. What will this look like in practice? What are you anticipating?
It's going to be complicated because, again, I don't know the exact nature of what he's trying to accomplish because the crime rate's down at historic lows. I think he can declare victory at the end by just saying it because people aren't really looking at numbers. Crime's personal. So there has been a survey of about 50% of D.C. residents who think crime's high, even though the statistics are low. So I think having all these Guard members and ATF and FBI people on the street, I think is going to temporarily reduce crime and people's viewpoint, but it's going to make them feel safer. So if they do the survey after that, they'll say, oh, I feel safer, and then he can point to that. He did talk about pushing this to other cities, and I think this is one of those, this is the first one. It was very easy to federalize law enforcement in D.C. He has control over the National Guard without any court fights. So I think it's the first play in something that we might see in other cities.
Let's talk about the role of these 120 FBI agents, mostly from the Washington field office. A senior law enforcement official tells NBC News the agents are being pulled from counterterrorism, violent crime, public corruption, cybercrime. And that official says this past weekend was chaotic. Agents were confused about their actual role on the streets and who they were reporting to at any given time. Rob, what does this tell you, and what concerns do you have?
I have lots of concerns. FBI agents aren't trained to be patrol officers. They're not trained to go out like this. Now they have tactical training, they have law enforcement training, but not in the same way a police officer is. They're doing jobs that really take specialized FBI agents to do. Now you're taking them off cybercrime, you're taking them off counterterrorism and national security, and you're putting them in an environment that they're not as familiar with. And again, the chain of command, who is reporting to who, how they're doing things, that doesn't lend itself to great practices on the street. Having them out there is one thing, and you can take media coverage and say, hey, we're doing something. But again, they're not the right forces to be doing this. MPD is down officers. They are down like 500-600 officers, but they still have 3,500. They still have the numbers out there to do it.
President Trump takes over. The president ordering the military to take over law enforcement in Washington, D.C. Trump saying 800 National Guard troops will be stationed in Washington and even more if necessary. Today, he painted a brutal picture of crime in the district.
It's becoming a situation of complete and total lawlessness. They fight back until you knock the hell out of them, because it's the only language they understand. It's a disgusting thing.
Keep that in mind, and then remember what the president said about January 6th, calling it, quote, very minor incidents. That's what he called the attack on the U.S. Capitol against law enforcement. At least 140 officers were injured. 5 officers died after the insurrection on the Capitol. And then the president pardoned his supporters. Now he's saying D.C. officers should, quote, fight back and knock the hell out of perpetrators. It's also worth noting that violent crime in Washington is actually falling dramatically. After a spike immediately following the pandemic, the violent crime rate in D.C. has been steadily going down ever since. Even one violent crime is too many, of course, but the rate is now at a 30-year low. So why Trump is claiming this is an emergency now? History. But we do know that the president has made a centerpiece of his presidency, and before that, his campaign, claims about violence in American cities, particularly Democratic ones.
The murder rate in Democrat-run cities like Chicago, Baltimore, New York, so many others, is higher than in Afghanistan.
You see the crime wave. Even without this, you see all in Democrat-run cities. Our country is now a cesspool of crime.
Just months ago, Trump sent thousands of troops into Los Angeles to quell small immigration protests. That move is still being challenged in court. The governor of California said the troops were not necessary and instead were, quote, props in the federal government's propaganda machine. Kristen Holmes is out front at the White House for us tonight. Kristen, I know you've been talking to your sources there about all of this. What's Trump's plan now to actually get this done?
Well, remember, Kate, it's not just Trump's plan. Now he actually has to work with Mayor Bowser, with the police chief here. They all have to work together to make this work. And it doesn't sound like they have any idea of what that's going to look like. There has been a behind-the-scenes scramble, particularly on the side of the city of D.C. The mayor, the police chief, all learned in real time as President Trump was announcing it that he was going to take over the D.C. Police Department. Now there are questions as to how exactly that's going to work. We heard Mayor Bowser at one point talking about how she essentially left a message for the Attorney General, Pam Bondi. She was told that that's who is in charge of all of this. At one point, we know that President Trump said that both Pam Bondi was going to be in charge of the police, but also the new DEA administrator, who has just been named Terry Cole, is also going to be an interim head of the police. So right now they are sorting through all of this, and there's still a lot of questions. I mean, one thing that was so interesting was that there was some outreach from the White House to Bowser's team, telling them that they were going to deploy the National Guard, but they didn't tell them the full scope of what it was that they wanted to do. Now, President Trump had started this process on Thursday of last week, increasing federal law enforcement, and today was really the culmination of all of that. Now, there are other questions as to what this means going forward, not just for the city of D.C., but really across the country. You heard President Trump almost point blank saying that he was going to look at this as a model of something that he could do in potentially New York or Chicago. Now, of course, it's going to be a lot harder to do in cities like New York and Chicago. There is kind of a gray area when it comes to D.C., and you heard Bowser acknowledge that today. Because it's not a state, there is a lot more that the federal government can do. But I can guarantee you right now that, because I've talked to a number of Democrats who have said that behind the scenes they're quietly conceding that there's not really much you can do in Washington, D.C., they're already looking at what they can do in other big cities if this is to expand.
Kristen Holmes, it's good to see you. Thank you so much. Up front with us now, Democratic Senator Paul Strauss. He represents the District of Columbia in the U.S. Senate. Senator, thank you very much. President Trump, so he's placing the D.C. police under federal control, deploying the National Guard, not ruling out even putting active duty troops in your city, in the district. What do you say?
This is all a terrible idea. Crime has been falling, as you've pointed out, and what this is going to do is create a sense of distrust between the local community that depends on and works with the police, and it's going to make people less willing to cooperate with investigations, less willing to testify. And he's also targeting some of our most vulnerable citizens, the homeless, immigrants. We want these people to be able to come forward if they see evidence of a crime. So things have been going well. In fact, the only problem we've had has been in the federal government.
What you're witnessing here is Donald disrespect National Guard, FBI people by effectively forcing them to be weaponized against their own citizens, and in some cases their own neighbors, for people who live in and around the DC area. So they're not happy. You could hear it from people. They're not happy because they have important things to do. Like there are important tasks that a lot of FBI agents have involved in stopping major corporate crime, in stopping fraud, in stopping terrorism in some cases. And they're, in some cases, being pulled from these fields, along with National Guards people, to police the streets of D.C. like it's a war zone. And not only is that fascistic, like, let's be clear, it's totalitarian. He's criminalizing a city because let's be clear, it's overwhelmingly Democratic and it's overwhelmingly African American compared to the rest of the country. Doing so, taking while real concerns exist, right? Like, let's be clear, while real concerns exist and while the crime rate in DC is falling, there are parts of the country where crime rates have not fallen like they have in D.C. Many of those areas are rural, white, and Republican. Why isn't Donald sending the FBI agents to those areas, right? Well, first of all, because one, these FBI agents, these National Guard, that's not their purpose, right? So even in those areas, that wouldn't be their purpose. But second of all, he's not doing it because he doesn't want to highlight his and his party's failures. So keep this in mind, why a lot of the people are frustrated. Trump is taking public servants who, in their mind, are doing the best they can to serve the public, and he's using them to stomp on the public.